And so what you see before you, of course, is Yosemite Valley, and it's from the inspiration point, the sort of classic view of El Capitan and Bridal Falls, and one that has been painted and photographed many times. I went there in 1998, and for my father-in-law's 70th birthday. My mother-in-law had gotten lucky and scored a cabin there, and I took in this view. And as an East Coast guy, it really opened my eyes to a different landscape, really in some ways to a different America. And I knew it was really a place that, well, the place resonated with me, moved me profoundly. It did what its name says it would do. It inspired me. And I knew I wanted to live with it and think about it and write about it. And I soon, when I started doing that, I soon discovered that John Muir's name kept coming up, and that John Muir was the sort of embodiment of the place. And looked into his career, started reading about him, and realized that he spoke to me profoundly, and that I wanted to write about him. One of the things that I read was Lenny Marsh Wolf's Pulitzer Prize winning biography from the 1940s. And what I realized was that Muir led this sprawling, amazing life. He did so much and he wrote about so much that it was kind of hard to grasp and get your arms around. And so I was looking for the central narrative arc that really would define Muir. And when I got to his work with his editor, Robert Underwood Johnson, I realized that this was the core, this was the central story that needed to be told. The things that they did together, these two guys did together. And ultimately, I think they had perhaps the most profound and productive writer-author relationship in American literature, perhaps even all of English literature, because together they not only helped Muir produce this amazing body of work of writing about nature, but they created Yosemite National Park. They put together the group that would get our National Forestry Service and National Forests underway, started the modern environmental movement, created the Sierra Club, of course, and so it's really an unmatched body of work. Muir, I have to move a couple screens here. Here we go. So Muir was born in Dunbar, Scotland, in 1838, and he lived there until he was 11 years old, and immigrated to the United States in 1849, the year of the gold rush, to Wisconsin. He is still celebrated in Scotland, and you can see to the right on the screen a statue that is there in the streets of Dunbar, and there's a very fine museum that I encourage everyone to visit there. But Muir spent a lot of time in nature with his grandfather while he was there. They would walk along the coast. It's a coastal city, and look in the tidal pools and see the maritime life there. And Muir became fascinated by it. Muir's own father was an evangelical Christian and was very much focused on that pursuit. And one of the reasons why he moved to the United States was for greater religious freedom. But in Muir's life, his father was a somewhat difficult man and very demanding. Muir worked on the farm with his siblings from dawn to dusk, often, and Muir's father wouldn't allow any books but the Bible in the house. So Muir actually would smuggle books in, and finally his father said, "Okay, well, you can read as long as it doesn't disturb your work life, so you can read in the middle of the night." So Muir invented a bed that worked with clockworks and pulleys that would pull the feet out of the from the foot of his bed and dump them in a pan of freezing cold water at 1 a.m. so he could get up and read. He was really extraordinarily motivated. Imagine if your college roommate couldn't afford a desk and instead invented one, designed one, and carved it out of wood, and it ended up looking like this. Well, this was Muir's desk at the University of Wisconsin. You can still see this desk at the university in the library. And when I saw it, it really made me realize how extraordinary Muir was. This thing is beautifully carved. It rotates every 15 minutes so that he can study a different subject and keep him on his study schedule. His room at college was a bit of a freak show and a museum. People came to see these crazy inventions that Muir was putting together, and also his specimens from nature that he was collecting and keeping in glass jars. And he wasn't your typical student. He studied Emerson at college, and he was profoundly affected by the wife of one of his professors, who became kind of a soulmate and a mentor to him. Muir, alas, could not afford to stay in school and eventually had to go to work. He taught school. He then wandered up to into Canada during the Civil War and worked in factories in manufacturing. He knew he wanted to do something good for mankind, but he didn't know what it might be. He could be a medical doctor. He might be a man of the cloth. He was very religious. He knew that manufacturing was important to mankind. He made broom handles and shovel handles, and he knew that made people's lives easier. So even with his great love of nature, eventually he understood that that the resources that we had were useful to make lives better. He wasn't sort of a purist for nature, as some people say he was. So we all know probably about his great walk to the Gulf of Mexico. And when that was one of the first books of his that I read, and I was very sorry. I was very moved by that walk, and I thought, boy, I'm going to go recreate that walk and write about it. Well, by the time I figured out that the book was going to be this narrative that covered what Muir and Johnson did, that ended up becoming a paragraph in this book eventually, so that I could stick to the narrative. Muir went out to California at about the age of 30 in 1869. And I want to read a passage to you from the book. He worked as a shepherd, and while he was in the mountains, he came down to the brink of Yosemite Falls, right to the edge. And I'll just read a little passage to the book from the book about that for you. Wishing to be a part of this God work as nearly as possible, Muir took off his shoes and stockings, and pressing his feet and hands against the slick granite, worked his way down until his head was near the booming, rushing, energizing stream. Noticing that it leveled before its dive, he hoped he could lean out over the edge and see down into the falling water and through it to the bottom. But when he reached the edge, he discovered it to be false. Another steeper ledge lay below. It appeared too steep to allow him to reach the brink. However, he could not convince himself to abandon the effort. He could see the cliff fully now and spied a narrow rim just wide enough to hold his heels. Studying the polished surface of river wall, he noticed a seam, a fault line that might provide the needed finger holds to reach the cliff's edge. His nerves tingled as he considered his next move. The reverberation of the water enveloped him, and he began to feel a part of it. A giddy mix of emotions, elation, wonder, fear, swam in his head. He had decided again not to move forward. But then he did. Some inner wildness had taken over. The slope was not his enemy. He was a part of it. He crept forward, and when he reached the small ledge about 3 inches wide, planted his heels on it. Then he shuffled sideways like a crab toward the precipice. 30 feet to go, 20 feet. the water beside him now white and agitated as it sped to its threshold, 10 feet. At last the edge was right in front of him. Legs firm, body stiff, arching, he peered over, his eyes bored into the billowing free fall, and he watched the spill separate into streamers, comets of water whose tails refracted the sunlight. As the creek flowed past him on its grand adventure, his body and soul seemed to hang there, somewhere in between terra firma and air infinitum. Another current, Emerson's words, he well knew. In the woods we return to reason and faith. There I feel nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, which nature cannot repair. Muir lost any sense of the passage of time and later could not remember his retreat from the ledge. Although a slip of the heel could have sent him over with a powerful creak, the magnificence of the fall, its ever active and changing form, its rumble and sudden silence, its action and refraction, its immediacy and its distance had him spellbound. So many stimuli bombarded his senses that there was no room for fear. Instead, where earth and water met air and light, Muir, with the religious fervor of his upbringing, saw God. He saw God in the fragmentation of the stream and in the rays of the sun passing through to make vivid rainbow beads. He saw God in the rebirth of the stream, suddenly expelled from earth, as death and a new life, a new journey, were simultaneously manifest. So that was Muir's first encounter with Yosemite Falls. You know, we think of Muir as a great writer about mountains and trees, but he wrote so much about water. He loved water. He loved waterfalls. He loved snow, ice crystals, and he explored all forms of water, ice, and snow in his life and wrote profoundly about it. And when I read about his seeing the stream come to the edge and flow over, die right there on the brink of the cliff and be reborn, I knew I was reading a powerful writer, one who had the ability to make nature very profound and seminal to the human experience. And it was another reason why I wanted to continue to explore his life and what he has meant to us. So I went to Yosemite, and here I am. Here's the creek coming to the edge today, a few years ago, and here I am right on the edge, looking down that 5,000 feet down into the valley. Muir didn't have a fear gene, really. He lacked that, and so he would go right up to the brink like this. He was an amazing alpine climber because he really didn't fear steep slopes and would explore. Sometimes he would get into a situation where he couldn't find a way down, couldn't find a way back up, and so he would let his hands take over. He had this amazing spiritual capacity and belief in himself and in what he was doing. He loved the valley so much that he decided that he would stay there. And during winters, when there were almost nobody was there, there was some slight tourism there in the late 1860s and early 1870s. But the people who ran the guest houses would generally leave to go get new provisions for the tourist season. Muir would stay and be he would be a caretaker for a guest house. And if you go there now, you see on the right of the screen in a little inset, there's a rock with a plaque, and that's where he built his own first cabin. You can see that it looks out on the lower Yosemite Fall. He stayed there and explored. He figured out that it was glaciers, glacial movement that had carved out the canyon, which was contrary to scientific belief at the time. And so other scientists were somewhat critical of him, but he knew, and he put hammered spikes into the glaciers and measured their movement to prove that it was glacial movement that had carved the canyons out. He wrote profoundly about the valley and made his name doing that. But he soon also would meet the love of his life, Louis Strenzel, and move to the coast to Martinez and become a fruit farmer. which he would do for about 10 years. And during that time, he was pulled away from Yosemite Valley and his nature writing. Emerson had visited him there, and he'd become quite the nature guru. Muir had. His editor for a lot of his work was Robert Underwood Johnson, who is the friend in the subtitle of my book. Johnson would write him and say, Muir, you've got to get back to your writing. And Muir's own wife, Louis, realized that that Muir needed nature, that he was suffering psychologically and physically by being on the farm. Even though she didn't really, she was kind of a homebody. She liked working on the farm. She played the piano. And here is in this inset in these photos is Muir took Louis to Yosemite Valley. She agreed to go with him one time. She didn't like to hike, and so here he is pushing her up the slope with a walking stick. And he drew this illustration in a letter to their daughter, who to one of their two daughters, Wanda. And Muir was a really devoted family man, and clearly a humorist here. And they had a very tight-knit family. Louis never went back to the mountains, but she knew that Muir needed to, and so she pushed him back out of the nest, so to speak. And Muir eventually went and climbed Mount Rainier, which is depicted here in only the sixth known ascent of Rainier. Very dangerous, but it revived him, got him back to the mountains, and made him realize that was his place. This is Muir on the right as a young man, and Robert Underwood Johnson. Johnson is older than Muir here, but he's really 15 years younger than Muir. And he's an extraordinary guy in his own right. There aren't many pictures of him. That's why I don't have one of the same age with Muir. But he was raised in Indiana, in Centerville, Indiana, where I just was a couple days ago on a Western swing. I stopped by there on my way back. His boyhood home is still there and can be visited. But at the age of 11, Johnson told his parents, I'm going to go work in the train depot. And his parents were sort of taken aback. Why would their son? He didn't need to do that. But his father was a justice of the peace there, and they were weren't needy. But Johnson was an enterprising young man. He said, "No, I want to go. The station master wants me to go work there for him." And so he went and he learned to work the telegraph. And there was another young man down the telegraph wires away who was sending telegrams so fast that the older guys couldn't pick them up, but Johnson could. Johnson would take them down. These telegraphs were being sent by a young guy named Thomas Edison, the Thomas Edison. And so Johnson and Edison were sending telegrams back and forth to each other. Johnson, this was during the Civil War. And so Johnson was taking down war news, often sad news for families, and even had to get on a horse and ride out to tell a family that their son had been killed in the war. And when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, it was Johnson who was at the telegraph machine, took down the message, went out on the train platform and made the announcement. So like Muir was an extraordinary, enterprising, precocious young man, and went on to be in Chicago during the Great Fire there. He was discovered as a literary talent and moved to New York City, where he became an editor for Scribner magazine and edited Muir. In 1879, Johnson went out to visit Muir in California, and Johnson had made his name by editing a series on the Civil War for Century magazine, which has become one of our great histories of the Civil War. Johnson they would interview the leaders on both sides of the major battles and publish these accounts for 3 years. It doubled the circulation for Scribner magazine, which had become Century magazine now, from 125,000 subscribers to 250,000 subscribers, gave Muir a bigger platform and allowed Johnson to become a prominent editor. His next big project was to do a series on the gold rush. He went out to California, met with Muir, and Muir said, "Hey, Johnson, now that you're out here, I want to take you to see Yosemite Valley, and I need to show you its beauty and what's being done to it." And so the two went there, and I want to read you a passage. They go to Soda Springs, which is in the upper half of what would become the national park. In the evening, they reached Soda Springs in Tuolumne Meadows at about 7,000 feet and set up their camp by the river. Muir and Johnson talked at length by the fire under a ceiling of stars until Muir tucked Johnson in with his feet toward the fire. The next morning after sunrise, Johnson called it a revelation of glory as the clear sun came bounding over the solemn glacial peaks. They set out to explore, heading through the open evergreen forest into Tuolumne Canyon, which Johnson later described as the wildest region ever haunted by the god of silence. One dense break of birch saplings nearly demoralized the editor, but he managed to squeeze through it into an open gorge at the base of a waterfall descending from a 1,000-foot wall of granite. All along, Muir, who leaped from rock to rock as surely as a mountain goat, according to Johnson, or skimmed along the surface of the ground, a trick of easy locomotion learned from Indians, chatted away, often ribbing Johnson for his lack of outdoors skills and inability to keep up. Now that he could see Muir in his element, Johnson was in awe of him. In the wilderness, Muir looked like John the Baptist as portrayed in bronze by Donatello, he wrote. He was spare of frame, full-bearded, hardy, keen of eye and visage, and on the march, eager of movement. Farther into the canyon, a tailless scramble was complicated by stubborn manzanita, while Muir crossed the tricky boulders with deft certainty and magically avoided being jabbed by the shrub, which concealed rigid trunks and branches beneath soft leaves. Johnson fell and floundered like a bad swimmer, as he described it, so that Muir had to give him many a helpful hand and cheering word. Johnson suffered multiple wounds from the manzanita and spitefully dubbed it an objectionable shrub. But the painful journey was not in vain. When he finally called it quits, he thought the resting place that Muir found him was one of the most beautiful spots he had ever seen, where the rushing river striking potholes in its granite bed was thrown up into a dozen water wheels 20 feet high. This on the screen is an illustration that Muir did of Johnson and Muir. It's the only image we have of Johnson and Muir together. There is no photograph, and this was one that Johnson that Muir drew, and you can see it's very faint, but the horsetail of the waterfall there. And Johnson was profoundly moved by his time with Muir, and around that campfire, Johnson said, "Look, Muir, you're right. This place is phenomenal, and we need to do something about this." Abraham Lincoln had preserved the valley back during the Civil War. He had given it to the state of California to take care of it. It was the first natural land to be protected in any way like this. But he had only saved the valley, and of course, Muir knew that you had to, if you just saved the valley, but you didn't save the territory around it, the valley wasn't going to survive. He knew from watching the sheep that he called the hooved locusts, that they would eat all the greenery, and that erosion would cause the streams to fail, and that the whole ecosystem would fail eventually if it wasn't protected. And he convinced Johnson of this. Johnson said, "Look, Muir, you write me 2 articles. I'll publish them in Century magazine. Then I'll take them down to Washington, D.C. and put them on every congressman's desk, and we'll get a national park bill passed." And Muir had been involved in politics very slightly. He had done some advocating, and it hadn't been successful for nature. So he was somewhat skeptical, but he trusted in his editor. He trusted Johnson. And so he wrote the articles. Johnson published them and did exactly what he said he was going to do, went down to Washington, and they passed a bill creating Yosemite National Park. They were so giddy about this. Johnson was so excited. He wanted to do more. He said, Muir, let's keep going. Let's save Kings Canyon. We should save all the Sierra Nevada. So Muir went back out and went down to the Kings Canyon area and started getting very involved in the life of the sequoias. He went down to the Converse Basin, which is now in Sequoia National Forest. And here the Sanger Lumber Company was cutting down the Converse Basin, which was the largest collection of sequoias on the planet, some 6,000 of them. And the mill manager who Muir talked to said, look, if you can get the government to trade us some other property, we'll trade you. These sequoias aren't even great for building. They weren't great lumber. And almost nobody, though, realized the incredible value of these 3,000-year-old trees. Only Muir realized that, hey, if you cut these things down, they're not going to grow back overnight. And so he got back to Johnson and tried to get Johnson to do something, but they couldn't do anything fast enough. These trees would, of the 6,000 trees, there are only about 150 of them left. And one of the first talks I did was for the Mark Twain House. The moderator of that talk said, I read a passage in the book 3 times, and it brought me to tears each time. So I started reading that passage. I thought if that moderator found it that moving, that it must be effective. I'll read this passage to you. As the General Noble tree in the Converse Basin Grove in 1892, a year after Twain's namesake met its demise, the giant sequoia lurched back against its stump in its death throes, as if admonishing the jubilant lumberjacks who had just severed the last fibers of what is believed to be the largest tree ever cut down. So here's the Mark Twain tree you're looking at right here. And this is the General Noble tree. The massive 3,000-year-old sequoia, named after the sitting Secretary of the Interior, both until that moment still very much alive, sent the men leaping as it smashed scaffolds and rigging. They fell onto the wildly vibrating stump, some 95 feet in circumference, the Chicago stump as it would become known, and found themselves balancing on wobbly knees in the midst of their own self-induced earthquake. They would make a 30-foot tall cross-section of the tree, cleanly cut at both ends, hollow it out, and then prepare it for transportation to Chicago, where during the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition, it would be erected in the White City, in the rotunda of the government building, ringed by benches and outfitted with a spiral staircase. Many people who saw it still thought it was a hoax. So people didn't believe, without seeing these trees live in the forest, they didn't believe they existed. And even when they cut them down and transported them to Chicago for the General Noble tree and erected it there, people still thought it was a hoax. So Muir was determined to try to save these trees as much as he could. I recently went out and visited the Converse Basin, and here it's very difficult to get a photograph that shows the scale of these immense trees. It's almost like being, back in the days of the dinosaurs. It's hard to imagine. The arrow on the left is pointing at me, and that's a close-up of me by the tree. This is, in fact, the bull tree. And I wanted to show it to you tonight because, we hear so many things about how hard it is, how crowded the Yosemite Valley is and our national parks are, and they are crowded. But this was about a 3-mile drive in on dirt roads and a 1.5-mile hike. I got to the Bull Tree with my wife, and we were able to enjoy it, to sit there and have lunch in its presence, and never saw another person there. So when you get off the beaten path, there's still opportunities to be there, to commune with nature and enjoy it. And so Muir and Johnson next helped form the Forestry Commission, which would recommend the saving of 21 million acres of forest land in the nation, and start what would become our national forests. This was their next major undertaking. As they did this, as they're advocating for nature, Johnson said, "Hey, Muir, you need to have a group out in California to do this. I could do it out in New York, but you don't want New Yorkers telling Californians what to do." And Muir said, "Hey, I'm the nature guy. I explore nature and I write about it, but I don't do groups. That's not my thing." Well, Johnson was a very determined guy. He didn't take no for an answer. And so he got together some professors at Berkeley and some other prominent business people in the San Francisco area, and said, "Hey, you guys need to have a meeting, put together a group, and invite Muir." That's essentially what happened. They formed the Sierra Club, and of course they elected Muir president of the Sierra Club, something that he couldn't say no to. So Johnson got his way there. Muir actually ended up loving this work of being a vocal advocate for nature. And that's how the Sierra Club got its start in 1892, which I'm sure most people in this audience are well aware of. And the Sierra Club was not formed to just to protect nature and to keep people out of nature. It was in fact formed for the exact opposite. It was formed to bring people to nature, and to open up nature to various people. Here, I love this photograph. This is women that they brought to the high trips. Muir's own daughters came on the high trips that they formed to go out into nature, to get people out into nature for 6 weeks at a time in the Sierra Nevada. Muir knew that once you got people into nature, they would fall in love with it and want to protect it and do the right thing. And so that was his goal and mission with the Sierra Club. After they put together the Forestry Commission and recommended the saving of 21 million acres of land, Muir was called upon to convince the public that this was a good idea. Why should this land be taken out of the private hands? And so Muir wrote a story for the Atlantic called The American Forest. Radio France International asked me to read a passage from that, and I thought, this really is an amazing piece that Muir wrote. So I'm going to read you a little section of that now. In The American Forest, Muir harkened back to his religious roots with a poetic creation myth for the nation's woodlands. The forests of America, however slighted by man, must have been a great delight to God, for they were the best he ever planted, he began. The whole continent was a garden, and from the beginning it seemed to be favored above all the other wild parks and gardens of the globe. These forests were composed of about 500 species of trees, all of them in some way useful to man, and some were lordly monarchs proclaiming the gospel of beauty like apostles. To Muir's eyes, they were fully alive. Nature fed them, dressed them, loaded them with flowers and fruit. The wind rustled their leaves, exercised their fibers, and pruned them. He described their beauty in all seasons and then rang the alarm. Even the fires of the Indians and the fierce shattering lightning seemed to work together only for good in clearing spots here and there for smooth garden prairies and openings for sunflowers seeking the light. But when the steel axe of the white man rang out in the startled air, their doom was sealed. The bread and money seekers denuded the Atlantic coast and devastated the Mississippi River Valley and the vast Great Lakes pine region. Finally, an invading horde of destroyers called settlers crossed the Rockies to fell and burn more fiercely than ever, at last reaching the wild side of the continent and the great aboriginal forests of the Pacific coast. Clearing has surely now gone far enough, he argued. The remnant protected will yield plenty of timber, a perennial harvest for every right use, without further diminution of its area, and will continue to cover the springs of the rivers that rise in the mountains and give irrigating waters to the dry valleys at their feet. New York's Central Park, once vigorously opposed, was now praised and renowned, and he believed the same would be true for the national parks and forest reservations. There will be a period of indifference on the part of the rich sleepy with wealth and of the toiling millions sleepy with poverty, most of whom never saw a forest, he wrote. A period of screaming protest and objection from the plunderers. But light is surely coming. Muir always maintained a very positive outlook, and knew that people would ultimately do the right thing when in regards to the environment. Of course, his biggest battle towards the end of his life would be to try to save Hetch Hetchy in the northern part of Yosemite National Valley. San Francisco wanted a water source, and they thought, well, the easiest way to get it would be to dam up the Tuolumne River at the narrow mouth of it coming out of the national park in Hetch Hetchy Valley. Muir and the Sierra Club opposed that for a good while and were successful at it. Secretaries of the Interior and presidents supported their point of view until 1906, when there was the great earthquake and fire in San Francisco, and all of a sudden San Francisco had political clout that they could attempt to cash in, and sure enough, they were able to convince Congress to give them Hetch Hetchy Valley. Here it is in its original state. Muir loved it and dearly valued it. He explored it early on. In many ways, he compared it to Yosemite Valley, but it was more remote, and he knew that that Yosemite Valley was eventually going to be overwhelmed by visitation, and that it would be wonderful to have another Yosemite Valley with very similar features formed by the same natural forces, and so he fought until his death in 1914 to save this park. But during that time, he was able to marshal the forces of the Sierra Club to get local groups around the nation, women's clubs, garden clubs, professors, and to form this grassroots movement to save nature. 5,000 letters landed on the desks of each congressman during that time, supporting the saving of Hetch Hetchy Valley. And they threw up their hands. They're like, what is this? They had never seen this before, this great grassroots movement. So he really, in doing this, set the stage for our modern environmental movement, which the Sierra Club and you guys are so important in today. And I'll just wrap up here with one last brief passage. This is from President Theodore Roosevelt, who, of course, visited Muir in Yosemite Valley in 1903 and had a very profound meeting with him. And I think you'll see the influence Muir had on him here. Roosevelt had been on a whistle-stop tour before his he became president after President McKinley was assassinated. So this would be his second term, but his first election. And so he was going around giving speeches and shaking hands, and was exhausted, and came to nature and Muir. Afterwards, he wrote, "I shall never forget our three camps. the first in the solemn temple of the giant sequoias, the next in the snowstorm among the silver firs near the brink of the cliff, and the third on the floor of the Yosemite in the open valley fronting the stupendous rocky mass of El Capitan, with the falls thundering in the distance on either hand. Lying out at night under the giant sequoias had been like lying in a temple built by no hand of man, a temple grander than any human architect could by any possibility build. And I hope for the preservation of the groves of giant trees simply because it would be a shame to our civilization to let them disappear. They are monuments in themselves, and I ask that your marvelous and natural resources be handed on unimpaired to your posterity. We are not building this country of ours for a day. It is to last through the ages. The president's deeds would be even more impressive. He would sign into existence 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, 55 national bird sanctuaries and wildlife refuges, and 150 national forests. Camping with the president was a remarkable experience, Muir later said. I fairly fell in love with them. And I think it's fair to say that Roosevelt fell in love with Muir and was very influenced by him, and that was among Muir and Johnson's greatest achievements, because it was Johnson who had told Roosevelt that if you go out to the West Coast, you need to go to Yosemite Valley and you need to have Muir as your guide. And so I think it's abundantly clear that these two guys had such a major influence on our environmental activism today. Here you can see the iconic picture of Roosevelt and Muir in the valley, and they're riding together in this next photograph below Half Dome there. And recently, the Johnson family, having read the book, said that they wanted to send me a gift. And amazingly, they sent me this original photograph that Roosevelt had signed to Johnson after the National Park Service had been formed, which was formed shortly after Muir's death and the loss of Hetch Hetchy Valley. So in essence, Muir and Johnson lost the battle for Hetch Hetchy, but they won the war when the Park Service was formed to protect our national parks and keep them inviolable. I'm going to stop there. And this is just, again, one recent picture that I took in Yosemite Valley, and I included here again to show that even today, you can go there and have moments of tranquility on the valley floor with this beautiful sunset reflecting on Half Dome. And I encourage you all to visit Yosemite Valley if you haven't. Muir wasn't naive. He knew that they had done great work, but he said, and these are the concluding words of my book, the battle for conservation must go on endlessly. It is part of the universal warfare between right and wrong. So I encourage you to keep up the great work, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have from the talk at this point. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dean. I'm going to pull up the chat for questions. Anybody who's here in person, if you would like to ask a question, I'll invite you to step up here and enter the wonderful world of Zoom for yourself. Come on, don't be shy. All right. In the chat, the first question is, what are the current threats to Yosemite today, including climate change?
Well, I think overcrowding is something that we hear about a lot. And it certainly is, if you're there in the summer and you find yourself in a caravan of cars and campers, it's a bit frustrating and difficult to commune with nature the way Muir wanted us to. So I think that's certainly one of the issues. And climate change, is having a profound effect in California with the forest fires, and the sequoias are threatened throughout, and they're going to extraordinary measures try to save these giant sequoias, but fire can strike at any point. So it's going to be an ongoing issue. Again, though, I encourage you to get off the beaten path if you do go to Yosemite. If you go to the inspiration point now, it's the tunnel view where the cars come through and you'll be in a big crowd of people. But if you go on the trail just behind the tunnel view, you can go to the old inspiration point and have it virtually to yourself.
Thank you. The next question is, John Muir has been criticized for his relations with people of color and Native Americans. Others have found him to be progressive for his time. What is your opinion of Muir's attitudes and behaviors in this context? And do you find it meaningful to evaluate him in the context of modern social attitudes?
Good question, a big question, and the whole sort of controversy broke out in the middle of while I was writing this book, and one I hadn't expected for to happen. So, but I did have an opportunity to examine these issues and write about it in the book. Muir, I believe, was very progressive in his views, contrary to some of the things that are being written today. And I think you'll see that in the book, that he admired Native Americans, and he wrote about the qualities they had that he admired. He was also, he had a bit of a jaundiced eye about all people at times. And, he had an engineering mind. He looked at things and examined them and just described them the way he saw them. So he would call behavior savage, whether it was Native Americans or white Americans cutting down trees. He was, critical of all. I think he saw, and I think he's misinterpreted. He saw degraded Native Americans who were, they were poor. They were in shabby clothes. They had started drinking alcohol. They had been degraded by white people. And so I don't think he was criticizing Native Americans in that way. I think he was criticizing what had been done to them. And so I understand the goals of equity that we want to bring to nature, and that the way we want to share it and make it accessible to all people. But I think we have to be not throw out our history and our intellectual pursuit of history for easy platitudes that aren't historically accurate.
Thank you, Dean.
Yeah.
Again, does anyone here tonight have a question in person? I'm not seeing any. Dean, I'll ask, since you have just recently been to Yosemite, what tips do you have besides you've already explained about getting off of the most choked areas and into the backwoods, but what is it like to visit Yosemite right now in 2023?
Well, I mean, I wish I could be there now with the waterfalls going the way they've been going, recently. I guess that might be trailing off a little bit now, but I was there last fall, and October is certainly, I think, considered the prime time to go, because the crowds are less, and the park is still fully accessible. You can get up to the northern part. I came in through Tuolumne Meadows and got to enjoy all that. So I think if you can get there in more of an off season, that's a great time to go. There are all kinds of sections of the park, off the valley floor that are fabulous and much less traveled. So I would certainly encourage exploring it in that way. I stayed out of the park just down the road, and certainly had wonderful access to driving up into the park. And so I would encourage going in the off season and just taking the time to get off the beaten path. And even on the valley floor there in the early evening, things quiet down, and you can find that peace that Muir wanted us to find there, and to commune with nature in that way.
Thank you. And one thing I found very interesting in your book is that in the time period you're talking about, how the Sierra Club, the entire Sierra Club had 500 or 750 members, and now a nationwide organization of nearly 4 million members. It's funny, it's interesting to think about. And also the time when US presidents went camping with the head of the Sierra Club.
Yeah, yep, times have changed. Also when I read that Muir and Johnson, a writer and editor, had published articles and then gone down to Congress and had a bill passed to create a national park, it's like that just doesn't exist now, and probably rarely ever existed. And it was something a story I really wanted to tell. So yeah, in the Muir was known, in circles like Roosevelt Circle, and it was largely thanks to Johnson, who was constantly sending people out there, and to his mentor, Gene Carr, who also sent scientists and Harvard professors out to see Muir, and realized that he was a special voice, the special voice. Emerson as well, visited and realized that Muir was really living the life. He was living among the forests and mountains, and tried to get Muir to come east to teach at Harvard. And Muir was conflicted by that, because Emerson was his hero, but he realized, the reason why Emerson respects me and loves me is because I'm doing probably what he wishes he could have done, which is to be here communing with nature. So that special spirit of being in nature really amazed me, how he could go out with, a loaf of bread and go climbing into Hetch Hetchy, or stay out in the mountains in snowstorms overnight, or for, a week in a hut that he had put together, and survive it and thrive in it. Certainly inspirational.
Absolutely. We do have an in-person questioner here. Roger, step right up.
My name's Roger. The reason I'm here to speak to you and to this audience is to say that over a period of years, my older daughter, who has lived in Palo Alto and Menlo Park, California, has been married to a hiking nut who started his hiking in the Smoky Mountains. And when he went west with work, he continued his hiking interest with a childhood buddy of his, and hiked in the Cascade Mountains and other kinds of places. At any rate, he has developed a great love for Yosemite. And so over the years, I have gotten text messages and emails before text messages. And just this very summer, I got these messages from Julia with pictures in a very cold creek. Their sophomore age high school son in this creek, shivering but enjoying himself, and his father likewise, and the younger sister, who's entering 5th grade now, she was doing the same. So this has been a part of my experience. I lived in California for 4 years and never went to Yosemite. I lived in the San Francisco area and in the Sonoma area, and traveled north to the mountains, but never went to Yosemite in the southern area away from where I was. So I have this living experience of Yosemite, and it's been very impressive to me, and I see their love for it. And I've heard of Muir through these Sierra Club gatherings and things. So I thank you very much for your current lively sharing of Yosemite, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate that. Love the testimonial. Love hearing, new generations enjoying Yosemite and being inspired by it. And that's what Muir wanted us to do. And, I think it's such an important point that Muir really wanted to, and the Sierra Club's all about bringing people to nature. That's what it was set up to do. It wasn't set up to preserve nature and keep people out of it, but that's where Muir believed people would find spiritual life and meaning of life in nature, and wanted to make sure that we protected it so that we could experience it that way.
Thank you. One more question in the chat, and then we'll bring up another in person here. From the chat, to the south of Yosemite is the beautiful Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park. Did Muir have anything to do with that becoming a park?
He did. There's some other forces. So Sequoia got named a park before Yosemite even, and but he did go down to Kings Canyon, and he had explored all that area earlier and written about it. And he went to Kings Canyon into that Converse Basin, which is Sequoia National Forest now, which I was talking about, and where the bull tree is. And Johnson Johnson really wanted to make Kings Canyon a national park early on because of this, but he became ill and had to step away from work for a while, and Kings Canyon wouldn't get named a national park till much later. But yes, I mean, Muir was really the champion of all the Sierra Nevada, and wanted to save that Sequoia belt in any way that he could. But was fighting, that was a novel concept in the nation then. This was, the time of Reconstruction, of industrialization, of the Transcontinental Railroad was formed during his life and during this whole period. So the nation was very gung-ho in about growth and and finding its economic success. So I think it's easy to forget and to lose perspective on what Muir and Johnson were fighting against at the time. It seems natural that anybody would want to save a Sequoia now, but back then, it came out of the blue.
Right. Thank you. We have another questioner coming up here. While he's coming, I'll remind everybody that if you are on Zoom tonight, you can purchase the book, Guardians of the Valley, by going to fountainbookstore.com. That's fountainbookstore.com. And of course, folks that are here tonight have a chance to buy it here tonight. We have another question from Glenn.
So I was just curious to know, folks in the audience, how many of you have been to Yosemite? Pretty awesome. That's a lot of us. Wow, very good. I asked that question, and this one's for you, Dean. Some of the pictures of the iconic pictures of Yosemite are from Ansel Adams, and I'm trying to think when Ansel Adams lived and when Muir lived, and whether they crossed paths or whether Ansel Adams came after Muir.
Adams was a bit after Muir, but a lot of Muybridge and a lot of famous photographers were there because of its incredible beauty. It was almost a pilgrimage to go out and photograph. So my editor wanted to use a lot of these great images because it was so. If I can just show you that, the inside cover of the book there, you can see that there's so many gorgeous images to choose from, and to see Yosemite over the various decades of time from the Civil War. It was a body of photographs that got out that made everybody realize we need to protect this incredibly spectacular landscape that we have.
Interesting little factoid. A few years ago, there was an exhibit of Ansel Adams photography here in Richmond, and it was here in Richmond because his niece lives here in Richmond. I don't know who she is, but I remember they brought this exhibit here of Ansel Adams photos because his niece, Ansel Adams' niece, lives in Richmond.
Oh, that's amazing. There's a gentleman here who's a great collector of Muir's work, and is probably has the finest private collection of Muir books in existence in Richmond, Virginia, who studied with Ansel Adams, studied photography with Ansel Adams too. So neat connection I discovered while working on the book, and I did not know that Ansel Adams had a niece here though. That's amazing.
Interesting. We have another question from Ralph.
Hi, Ralph White. Wonderful show that you've presented. We're entering a time of major change due to the climate. what sorts of things have to change in the management of Yosemite and by extension, all of our national parks?
Well, I'm somewhat of an expert on the history of Muir, but you would probably be more of an expert on that topic than I would be. So I'd love to have you just say a word or two about that, if you would. I could offer a couple things, but you being an eminent protector of the environment, maybe you could say a couple words.
Wow, I didn't expect it to have been flipped back on me. The quick answer is that I don't know. The long answer is that we all know, and it is a restriction on how many people can go in at any given time and what they can do. The classic example is to go to a marsh to watch the sunrise or the sunset and the birds and hear the frogs, and somebody brings a radio, starts playing rap music, or rock and roll, whatever. You can't do that. Your own space shrinks as the mass of people comes together. How you do that, I'm not sure. More bicycles, more independent, different trails, for examples, maybe more guided tours, not necessarily by National Park Service rangers. I used to be a ranger, but I think that professionals who are concessionaires might have unique ways to bring people into parts of our national parks that aren't as used and could take extra use. That's one of the things that comes to mind. I don't know how you decide what kinds of plants you're going to try and preserve and how much invasive species you're going to try and keep out. It's a little bit like dandelions in your yard. You either learn to live with them or you learn to live with half as many, but you never get rid of all of them. So the quick answer is I don't know, but in the long run, I think we all know that it means a lighter hand and footprint by all of us who visit.
Thank you for your service. And I think we're up against a lot of big issues in the way that I think we need to change our lifestyle a lot, in regards to the environment. And it's going to take some pretty big changes. Interestingly, the Sierra Club supported bringing cars into Yosemite because they wanted to bring people to there, but they couldn't have anticipated the population explosion. Muir called them puffing machines. He wasn't so sure about it, but in the second meeting of the National Park Superintendents, which was in Yosemite, the Sierra Club was there supporting, bringing roads in and letting cars come in because they could get more people, or of a different class, not just wealthy people who could afford train tickets and long periods of time off. They could get there quicker, more access. But of course, they couldn't anticipate the pressures that we have on the parks now.
These are times of great change, and it's incumbent upon all of us who would consider ourselves environmentalists to find out what those changes mean in terms of our national policy and what they mean in terms of our own personal behavior. Yosemite is a wonderful resource, and I think that you've covered it very well in your book. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Dean, I think that is it. I think we can let you go. No, wait. Just a statement, I think, in the chat that says maybe virtual reality can help more of us experience these places without air travel and other environmental impacts.
Well, there is that, and I'm sure there's a lot of images that are available and that you can, relate to. I think also, there are a lot more remote parks. You could go down to Big Bend, or so I think exploring the other and great state parks, national parks, state parks, and just finding your own spot, in a lot of different places, along the James River, wherever it is to do the communing with nature that Muir wanted us to do. And I think that the Sierra Club encourages. It can be done anywhere. That's a magnificent place to do it. But encourage everybody to find their own personal places as well.
Excellent point. Yes, we have a gigantic, beautiful country, and we have a beautiful city here in Richmond.
Indeed.
All right, Dean, I want to thank you for being with us tonight. You're a trooper. We're so glad we could do this. We could have you here despite the obstacles.
Honor to be here. Thank you. Appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Turn what? Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to have a few announcements, but first let's do the drawing to give away our door prizes, which are 2 copies of the book. We have here the raffle tickets, an impartial drawer, and the first number. Check your numbers, please. The first number is 641048. A winner. All right, and we have another chance. Check your numbers. The second winning ticket is 641038. 038. No way, Roger. No fix. The fix was not in, ladies and gentlemen. Roger the car wins one. Let me check that. All right. Let's see. There is a lot going on in the next month, and that's what we're going to focus on in announcements. I think maybe Siobhan's going to put them on the screen, but I'm going to wade in and start trying anyway. Tomorrow morning? All right. If you have been imbued with the spirit of John Muir here tonight, you can come to a rally, a protest tomorrow morning at the Air Board of the state of Virginia. I'm talking about like 12 hours from right now, 9:30 a.m. at 1651 East Parham Road, where, yep, you do see it on your screen now. And wait. So actually, I'm saying something that's not even on the screen, but tomorrow morning, at the Air Board meeting, outside the Air Board meeting, is that at J. Sarge Reynolds? At J. Sarge Reynolds Community College, 1651 East Parham Road. There will be a rally at 9:30 a.m. as the people go into the Air Board, where we want to let them know that we do not want a brand new gas, fossil fuel power plant in Chesterfield County. This is something that Dominion Energy wants to build, and obviously at this time, it is absolutely the wrong direction to take. All right, now we're going to go down the rest of these, and it's time to see if Joe can read what you can read on the screen also. Tomorrow night at the exact same place. All right, don't let this confuse you. In the morning, there's the rally at J. Sargent Reynolds. In the evening, there's a Henrico County Board of Supervisors candidate forum at J. Sargent Reynolds. You can see the address on your screen. This has been put together with great effort by Aileen Rivera, by Glenn Bessa, by a whole lot of us. And we think it's very important that these people who want to run Henrico County meet with the voters and explain their positions. So we would love it if you could come out to that free event tomorrow night. Next up on the 14th, which is this Thursday night, at 6 p.m. at the Downtown Library in Richmond. We have a workshop on effective advocacy and civic engagement led by Virginia Sierra Club staff member Tim Sawinski. That is this Thursday, 6 p.m. Also, this Thursday at 6 p.m. It's a shame you cannot be in two places at once, but at the Cultural Arts Center of Glen Allen, the Environment at Risk art exhibit is having an opening reception with live music from Holy River. And we have members of our very own Falls of the James group who have art in that exhibit. So that's the opening reception of an exhibit that will continue there until November 5th. But check that out if you have a chance. This Sunday in New York City is a march to end fossil fuels, anticipated to be the largest climate march in years, urging President Joe Biden to stop the expansion of fossil fuels. And there are just a couple of spots left on a bus from Richmond to New York City, leaving bright and early this Sunday morning.
That's like
Dark and early, all right. And the Richmond City Council is poised, but perhaps taking a little slower path than we thought, but they are poised to do a good thing. And that is to create a public utility commission, which would give some oversight of the Richmond Gas Works and also handle other issues. This is an area of which Richmond City Council and we as citizens are kept in the dark about a lot. And so the creation of a public utility commission is something we strongly support. And at the City Council meeting on September 25th, we want to go and express our support for this and push them to get moving on this and create this body because it is badly needed. Continuing on, we have outings. There's a hike on September 23rd at the Beaver Lake at Pocahontas State Park, one of the beautiful places like Dean talked about that is right here, our closest state park from 9:30 a.m. till noon. And this hike is easy to moderate. And we will be back here. We're going to have each program for the rest of this year right here in the friendly confines of the Orami congregation. The next program will be on October 10th, and we have an author that night, and his name is Mark Deutsch, and the book is The Carbon Almanac. So we hope you can come back. We're going to do door prizes again that night, and hopefully we'll all be in person that night. Shortly after that, there is a paddling trip at Merchants Mill Pond State Park, just over the border into North Carolina. And we have details about that. There's a link to sign up for that. And finally, we have 3 tabling events. These are events in which we would like to have a presence and meet the public in the month of October. There's the Richmond Veg Fest at Dogwood Dell. There is the Henrico Energy Fair, Parham Road, and then there is the Native Plant Festival in Trump Park on the north side. And these are all events on weekends in October, at which we would love to have a presence. We'd love to have you volunteer to go out and join us at tabling at those events. All this kind of thing. We have a sign-up sheet in the back of the room here tonight for those events. All these events and more are in the newsletter. If you're not currently receiving a newsletter, you can sign up to receive it. Here it is, glorious color. This can come to your email inbox. And with that, unless I see any, I do see, yes?
There's a note in the chat from Walt Auburn about another activity going on.
Let's check this out. I'm looking.